Hi, friends. I'm about to make a bunch of stuff up. Is it going to be good? I don't know. Welcome to the good world.
1, 2, 3.
So come on into a place that is fun. I'll be your friend and you can be mine. The world is a stream of constant bullshit, but that doesn't mean there's not a whole lot of good shit. You start with the lean and we can make something different. Let's build a world that is good.
This is a show for adults.
Hi, friends. So I am going to try something today that I've been wanting to try for a while, which leans on my improv background. I'm going to try to just improvise an entire video, from a suggestion of a single word. And so there is a website that I have found. That's what my tablet is doing here. It's canigeta.com. Can-I-get-a.com. And it's sort of hard to, when I'm recording a video, to prove that I'm not like cheating. And when I did improv in college, people would often ask me like, okay, but you guys like planned a bunch of those scenes, right? And you were just trying to figure out a way to get from the suggestion to the scenes you had planned. And like, no, we just made it up. So I'm just making it up. But so I have this to do a suggestion, but obviously, I could have it set up. Right now it says rats. I'm not going to use that word. But just to try to make it a little more challenging for myself and a little more clear that I'm not cheating, this fidget spinner, you can maybe see there's a red number 1 there, and then there's it's like very hard to see on screen. There's a black number 2, and then there's a pretty faint blue number 3. And so I'm going to spin this, and then I'm going to stop it at some point. And I'll do a big spin. And then whatever number it lands on, I'm going to push the word button that many times, and then I will use that word. I think I'm going to do it twice so that, if it comes up 1, it's not like the next word. Again, I'm trying to like introduce some chaos into this. Everybody loves chaos, right? Sometimes. Controlled, fun chaos is very fun. Uncontrolled, unfun chaos, kind of a problem. Okay, so this website is still up, and okay, this one I think I stopped it on. Or, well, at this point I did. That's a 2. It's a black 2. You may be able to see that. So I will get 2 words, and then we'll do it one more. This one that was the red 1 that it stopped on. I hope you believe me. Maybe you don't. Okay, so that's 3. So, and I'm doing a word. So one time it says lemon, one time it says alone, and the third time it says street. Okay, so my suggestion is street. I'm just going to put my tablet over there so it's out of frame. I am not going to leave the frame because then I could make a cut and you would know that maybe I'm cheating. So let's think about the word street. I guess, well, immediately what's coming to mind for me is I have talked before about citrus season in Sacramento, and so the word street makes me think of my street here in Sacramento and my neighbors. And one of my neighbors, 2 doors down, is a gentleman named Orv, who is in his 90s. I don't remember at this point. He's been in his 90s for a couple of years, so he's maybe 92. Orv is short for Orville, which is not a super common name among my generation. But Orv is very nice, and Orv lives a couple doors down from me. And when Susie and I when we sort of first moved in, and as we started getting to know some neighbors of ours, we sort of initially only knew the people immediately around us, and then we went to, there was like a New Year's sort of daytime gathering, and so we met some other neighbors who live kind of around the corner. And the reason they come to mind is their names are Drew and Tuesday, and they provided all of the citrus that I used for my citrus video at the end of 2024. And then through them, we met some other neighbors, and so now we've gotten to know a lot of people sort of in the extended neighborhood. And whenever people ask where we live, we've tried to tell them, at the end of that street, or we have this car, sort of all these different things. And they wouldn't really know what we were saying, and then eventually we would get to the point where they would sort of figure out what we were saying, and they'd say, "Oh, you're over by Orf." Right, and so now we have learned that we just tell people, they say, "Where do you live?" We say, we're just past Orf. Because Orv is a neighborhood landmark. And I just think it is sort of delightful that a person can have a presence that is so significant as to become a landmark for an entire neighborhood. And Orv, as I mentioned, is in his 90s. He has lived in his current home since it was built in the 1960s. So that's like, boy, my math is, that's like 60 years? Yeah, 60, 100, 120, math. You know, I used to do math for a living. Anyway, Orv is a neighborhood landmark. Sacramento citrus is great. And I like the idea of sort of being, Orv is not someone who people know outside of Land Park where I live, but like within my immediate neighborhood, you could put him on a map. And he's retired, and as I think often happens with people who are retired, he's a little bored. And so he spends a lot of time. Sacramento has more hours of sunshine annually than most cities in the US, more hours of sunshine annually than Los Angeles. It wasn't the only reason we moved here, but when we were starting to think about moving, we were kind of like ready to leave DC. We had both lived there for a while. And we were like, well, maybe we go somewhere with sunshine. And I looked up what cities have the most hours of sunshine in the US. And it's like, it's a lot of Sunbelt, like Florida, Arizona, Nevada. And we were not, no offense to Las Vegas, we were not going to live in Las Vegas or Phoenix. Irrigated deserts make us sad. But Sacramento, very high on the list. And so we ended up here in Sacramento, land of sunshine. City of Trees is also one of the nicknames. And so we ended up here in Sacramento, and I think it surprised a lot of people from my life. A lot of my good friends have said things to me along the lines of, Sacramento, how'd you end up there? Because I grew up immediately outside of New York City. I lived in New York City for a while. A lot of my close friends from college still live in New York City, and even a lot of my close friends who don't live in New York, I have close friends in Philly, I have close friends in DC, so there's a lot of my life sort of over in the northeastern part of the US, and I am far away from that, and I am also in Sacramento is like, it's not the biggest city in the world, right? It's very much a mid-sized city. And my cousin, who lives in LA, at some point was talking to me about it, and he was like, "You go to Kings games, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "How long does it take you to get to Kings games?" And I was like, "Well, it's like a 9-10 minute drive, and then I park on the street, and then it's like maybe another 10 minutes to walk to the arena." And he was like, "Man, when I go to Lakers games, I have to drive for about an hour and a half in each direction." And he said, "You're living the dream of the mid-sized city." And I am. We are living the dream of the mid-sized city. It's like, it's getting more expensive, but it's a lot more affordable than New York or Chicago or San Francisco. And you can see our garden behind me, kind of, but there's a giant artichoke plant right there. It could be more walkable. There could be better public transit. But Sacramento is a great place to live. And I grew up with a narrative that was basically, it was, New York, New York. If I can make it here, I can make it anywhere. And sort of, there's a line from Woody Allen, of all people, that is something along the lines of, anyone who isn't living in New York must on some level be kidding themselves. And I bought into that for a while, because I was like, yeah, well, New York, why would you want to be somewhere other than this enormous place? And at this point in my life, and I'm not trying to hate on New York, but New York it's very crowded. It is a lot of people, and it's very loud. And there are a lot of people who really enjoy and feed off of that energy. But at this point, I really love having a yard and a garden that I can kind of walk around in and look at the plants. And at some point soon, I'll do a garden tour. I was also thinking about doing that today. Maybe my thought was like, well, should I do this sort of improvised video thing, or should I just do a garden tour? Or I could do a shed tour. I'm standing here normally you're accustomed to seeing me sitting at my desk, which is behind where you are right now. And so normally I'm sitting there and I'm looking this way and I'm looking out these windows, but instead I have my camera over here and I'm standing. It's a room that exists in space, different dimensions. But I think there is a tendency to overlook places like Sacramento and to overlook sort of the less famous places in the world. When Susie and I, so several years ago, not too long after we got married, we were gearing up for our wedding, and one evening, because at that point I was like often staying up till 2 in the morning, and so one night I sort of had this thought in my head, what if we both quit our jobs and traveled for a few months? Because both of us had been at our jobs for a while, we were kind of ready to move on in the same way that a couple years later we were ready to move on from DC. And it was like, well, we're going to have this wedding, we're going to get money from people, we're going to get we have a honeymoon fund on our registry, and so we're going to get that. We also got a bunch of credit card points from throwing our wedding, and it was at a hotel, so we used our Chase cards and we got triple points. It was great. So we had all of these points, and we had also accrued all of these points and miles from both of us were different kinds of consultants. Susie was a health tech consultant, and I was a political consultant, and we both had traveled a lot, and so we had all of these airplane miles and credit card points and all these things. So it was like, okay, great, let's quit our jobs and let's go travel for a while. And we at that point only had one dog. We had Charlie, but we had some dear friends who their dog had just died, and they loved our dog Charlie. And they were like, well, if you guys want to do that, we can take Charlie for a few months. And so it worked out wonderfully. And they got to have our great dog, and he got to have some great humans. That was great. But so we traveled to a whole bunch of places. This is the trip I mentioned last episode. Started off with the trip to India, and we were in Bangalore in southern India for a week for Susie's cousin's wedding, and then we went on a safari in a national park south of there. We saw a tiger in the wild, which was crazy. We are very fortunate people. I want to make clear that I recognize that this is not available to everyone. And my view generally is I try to let myself do things that I think should be available to everyone. And I think everyone should have the freedom to take time off. Everyone should have the freedom to go and visit other cultures and go and visit nature. And I realize that making that happen at scale is it's not an easy wave your hand kind of thing. But I nonetheless think the world is richer for me when I can experience other cultures and different parts of the world, and I try as part of what I'm doing here to sort of bring some of that. So we saw the tiger, and then we went to Vietnam for a while, and we did a trek. We went to all these different places, and for the last month of the trip, we were getting kind of tired because we had been on the move a lot, and it was amazing, but it can be tiring to sort of never stay more than 2 or 3 nights in the same place and sort of pack up again and be on the move, which, as an aside, I have talked about homelessness on here before, and homelessness is very taxing on your mental health. One of the ways is that you are constantly having to pick up and move to a new place, and your brain just gets very stressed by that, and it puts you into survival mode. And so there's often this belief that a lot of people who are living on the street are there because they have mental health issues. And a lot of them do have mental health issues. But very often the mental health issues came after the living on the street. Because if you are living in survival mode nonstop for months, for years, it's really, really taxing on your physical body and on your brain, right? And you're not just having to move constantly, which is stressful enough on its own, and also means that when you try to sleep, your brain never quite feels safe. Right? Your brain is always like, I'm in a new place, I'm adjusting, and so you're never able to get a good night's sleep. On top of which, if you're living in an encampment, there's not a lot of security. People steal things, and people do all kinds of things. I think I've talked about people driving by honking car horns and waking people up in the middle of the night. And so even if you were settled in the same place for a while, you're not going to be able to get a lot of sleep. And as we know, sleep is a very, very important thing for human health. So anyway, there's really a big juxtaposition here between between the sort of enforced stress of living on the streets and the chosen stress that we were able to opt out of we've been traveling a lot, hey, let's just settle down for a little while, right? And it's a lot more fun if you get to choose it. It's a lot more unpleasant if you don't. And it was tiring even though we had chosen it. And so we decided we would finish up. We had gone during the course of this trip. We had met up with some friends. Actually, I'll do a little tangent here to tell a story about it. So our friends Rob and Emerald. Rob is a chef, and we told them when we started planning this trip, hey, do you guys want to meet us, somewhere in the world? We can go meet you anytime in these few months. Like, tell us a place and tell us when you're going to go. And Rob is a chef and had always wanted to go to France, and so we went to Champagne, which was fantastic. But so we went to meet them. Susie and I had flown in a couple days earlier. We rented a car and we go to pick them up at the train station. And there's like a walkway over the train track. And we're standing there and looking down at the window. And the train pulls in and we see them step off the train. And we're like, oh, there they are. They're our friends, Rob and Emerald. Rob is a very tall, bright red hair man, and Emerald is neither of those things. And we see them walk off the train and we're like, oh, good, they made it here. Like, they're not necessarily great at travel logistics, but there they are, they made it. And then we see them turn around and get back on the train. And we're like, oh, no. And we go and we sprint down the walkway, and Susie runs onto the train and is like, Emerald, Rob, come on. And they grab their stuff and they get off the train, and we're fine. And so we go and we get into the car, we hug each other, and we had an appointment for a wine tasting because we were in Champagne, and so that's what you do. You go and you taste wine. But first we needed food because they were very jet lagged and it was lunchtime for us. And so we went to, I don't remember the name of it, but we went to like a French, I would call it a deli cafe kind of place. And we said, there are four of us, I don't know, bring us an appropriate amount of food. Because it was that kind of place where you just say, yeah, I don't know, bring us some food. We'll eat it. And they brought us the most spectacular spread that I have ever seen in my life of meats and cheeses and fruits and all of these things. It was incredible. And we had to go pretty soon because we had to get to this wine tasting. And so we ate this enormous spread of food that I'll put a picture up. No, I'm not going to put a picture up. I'll put a link to the picture in the description because I am not interrupting this video, so you can tell that this video is an unbroken stream of consciousness. But they brought us out this incredible platter, and we housed it. We ate the entire thing in maybe 15 minutes among the four of us. All four of us are people who can eat. And I remember the staff came out to like check in on us, see if we wanted a drink, and they looked down and saw that all the food was gone, and they were horrified. They were just scandalized. They were like, oh, you ate all of that food so fast. There is no way you had the time to enjoy it. And this was a time in my life before I learned about mindfulness and mindful eating and things like that. And it's true, we had just taken all this food and just shoveled it into our faces. And it was, it was like a little funny in the moment, but it is also sad. It is kind of tragic. And I understand the perspective that the staff from this place were giving us when they reacted that way. And that is something that I came to appreciate about French culture. So that was my tangent. So Susie and I, after Emerald and Rob went home, we kept driving south in France, and we spent 2 nights in Lyon, France, and just fell in love with the place. It's a really, really beautiful city. It's very, very walkable. It's not overwhelmingly huge, but it's plenty big. It's got incredible history. I could do an entire episode, maybe at some point I will, about Lyon, France. The history is incredible. It was founded by the Romans at the confluence in French, yeah, same word, of the Rhone and the Saône rivers. It's Saone. I don't know how to pronounce Saône, but the Rhone is the other. But these two big rivers meet up there, and there's it's called presqu'île, which means almost island. It's like a peninsula where the rivers meet. And that's where a lot of the city is. The original settlement was on the western side of the rivers. But a lot of the old stuff is sort of on this almost island, and yeah, there's an old Roman history. There's a like 3rd century church. I mean, it's just the ruins of that at this point. But there are also incredible more modern churches. There's a Roman amphitheater. There are all of these. They're called traboules, which are these pathways like in alleyways and like under buildings that are sort of not, they're not like the main streets, they're just these little pathways, because at the top of Presqu'île is an area called Croix-Rousse, Red Cross, which was where all the silk workers used to live in, I want to say like 17th century, 18th century, and so they would carry all of their silk down to the port. They were at the top of the hill and they had to go down to water level, down on the almost island. And so all of these little passageways were a way for them to go straight down instead of having to do all of the zigzagging you would do on normal streets. And then flash forward a couple hundred years later, during World War II, during Nazi-occupied Vichy France, we also went to Vichy, very delicious water. Side note with Vichy, it's named for a spring that's there. There's a spring, and it's basically, it's like Perrier, but instead of being Perrier, it's Vichy water. So it's naturally carbonated spring water, and literally there's a spring in town, and there are a bunch of taps on it, like faucets, and you just go up with your water bottle, and you turn the tap, and it fills up your bottle with, again, effectively Perrier. It's mineral water. It's incredible. You just go and get your free, naturally carbonated bubble water in Vichy. And then there are also spas. Vichy, that was an interesting place too. But so during World War II in Lyon, these traboules, these passageways, were used by the French resistance against the Nazis, because the Nazis didn't have a map of it, and they didn't know how to follow these ways, and so it was a really useful way for the resistance to work against the Nazis. So that was another really cool piece of history. There's this incredible history there. There's amazing street art. The food is incredible. It also was one of the first sort of food tourism destinations. And this tells you a little bit about the culture of the world, because the silk workers, so they were at the top of the hill and the docks were at the bottom of the hill. And so these meat carts would come to the markets down at the bottom of the hill by the port. And the butchers would walk up the hill with their carts, right? Their pull carts, like, I don't know, I'm thinking like Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, but not exactly the same, but a pull cart. And as they got higher and higher up the hill, most of the good meat would be sold off. And so by the time they got to where the silk workers lived, up at the top of the hill, all that was left was like organ meat and kidneys and brains and things like that. And so the silk workers were like, well, okay, these are the ingredients we have. And they figured out how to cook with that. And that became known as the cuisine of Lyon, France. And that became a thing. People traveled to Lyon from other places to try out Lyonnaise cuisine, which was this sort of organ meat heavy, offal heavy, OFFAL, not AWFUL, awful heavy diet. And all these restaurants opened, and so the food kind of came back down. And so you have this thing where basically peasant food became a luxury that people would travel for, which is something that has happened a lot sort of throughout history, and particularly has been a recurring theme with colonization, where sort of the peasant food of the colonized country becomes like a delicacy in the colonizer's country. It's all very messy. But I try to appreciate the food for what it is while holding the complexity of the history, because both of those things are real simultaneously. And that is, if you cannot tell by now, that is a big part of my approach to the world. But so we ended up spending a month in Lyon, France, and it was really, really lovely. It was just a beautiful place to stay. We rented a place up in Croix-Rousse. The daily market was honestly bigger and better than the farmers market in Sacramento, which is the biggest and best farmers market I have been to in the US. And there it was every day instead of every week. It's just an incredible place. And I had no idea, because when we Americans think about other countries, we think about France, we're like, oh, Paris, Eiffel Tower, that's France. And France is so much more than just Paris and the Eiffel Tower. And here, coming back around, Sacramento, California is so much more than San Francisco and LA. It's so much more than Hollywood. It's even so much more than Yosemite, which is a place that people know. There are, I think, 9 national parks in the state of California. There's Yosemite, Sequoia, Kings Canyon, Joshua Tree, Death Valley, Pinnacles, Lassen, Redwoods, and Catalina. That's 9. I think I have that right. I'll put it in the description if I missed anything. But California is so much more. And Sacramento, look, is it the most incredible place to visit? Not really. We have some neat things, but it's such a great place to live. And the people here, for the most part, are really friendly. And everyone, I lived in New York for a while, and I commuted in New York, and not everyone, but overwhelmingly a lot of people are really just sort of locked into, I have places to be, I have things I need to do, and they're kind of in a rush, and it's very hard to slow down and stop anything. I believe I learned at some point that Deepak Chopra lives in New York in part because he finds it to be the most challenging place to do mindfulness practice. You go outside and try to stay present and move slowly while you are surrounded by people who are pushing each other out of the way because they need to be where they need to be, and don't you know how important they are? And I was like that for a long time. I thought, I'm a very important person. I have important things to do. Why are all these people in my way? And I'm not going to say tourists aren't annoying, because tourists are annoying. That's a separate thing. But living in a place that doesn't have a ton of tourists, it's I guess I'll say it's kind of chill, right? It's a very laid back, like people slow down a little. People appreciate things in a way that we did not get to at that little cafe in France. And there's a lot to be said for taking the time to appreciate things. There's a lot to be said for enjoying time in your community, for enjoying time spent in the garden. And I just really appreciate that. And I did not ever realize until I moved here that I don't need to be in a huge global city to matter. That people who live in mid-sized cities matter. That people who live in rural areas matter. Right? I didn't really realize any of that. I thought that I was important and the other people were small and it didn't matter. And they do. Everywhere I have ever been, people are just people trying to live their lives. And Sacramento is one of those places. And look, I also need to acknowledge that people in all of these places are suffering a lot right now. There's this narrative that I see a lot of the time about how all of the Democrat-run cities are a disaster. Look at San Francisco. It's a hellhole. You can't even go there. First off, it's not true. I mean, San Francisco has for a long time had some serious segregation within its neighborhoods by sort of wealth. And the last time Susie and I were there, we stayed in a hotel, and if you went left, you got to like Gucci and all these luxury stores, and if you went right, you were in a street encampment. And so like San Francisco is definitely it is an inconsistent place. But I've also heard people say, you can't go to New York, it's too dangerous. Man, New York is doing great. I was there late last year. New York is in great shape. They have all kinds of new neighborhoods and new stuff going up. They have the subways are clean. I mean, the mayor seems like maybe kind of a disaster, but like the people of New York are in great shape. And so we have these narratives about like, oh, cities are a disaster, as though a lot of the same problems that exist in cities don't exist outside of cities, right? Meth is not just a city problem. Fentanyl is not just a city problem. Poverty is not just a city problem. Sacramento is not very rural, but we are not that far. It's also not that urban, and we are not that far from places that are very rural. And I will tell you, there are a lot of cities sort of in the surrounding area around Sacramento in Northern California that are having a rough time, and they are not big Democrat-run cities. And if you go outside of those cities and really go into the country, people are not doing great in a lot of places. And it is not because of whatever the city policies are. It is because the wealth in America, and to a lesser extent the entire world, or maybe it's a greater extent, I don't know, but also in the entire world the same thing is going on. But the wealth is just being siphoned away from people to a smaller and smaller and smaller portion of the population. And so you get this desperation, you get this loneliness, you get this isolation. And when people are lonely and desperate and isolated, sometimes they turn to drugs, sometimes they turn to crime. People without options will do some pretty drastic things. And that is something that everyone is experiencing, whether they live in a big city or whether they live in what a lot of New Yorkers would call the middle of nowhere, right? Even if you live in the hills outside of Loomis, California, which is a town I had not heard of until I lived here. Even if you live in Sites, California, which is a very, very tiny town up in the mountains. All of these places, our problems are the same. Our problems are that there are enough resources to go around and we are being denied them. We are all being denied the resources that we need to thrive. And what I love about my community here in Sacramento is that it is a community and we do support each other and we do share resources. I talked in the citrus episode, and that's citrus season, but the same thing happens in the fall when there are figs and persimmons. We have friends who have a fig tree that makes figs the size of my fist. Literally, they are quarter-pound figs. In the summer and spring, you get stone fruit. We have, you can't really see it, there's a peach tree right here. And people share all of this because nature is abundant. The world is abundant. And good neighbors share that with each other. And we as a society have stopped being good neighbors, right? We've started putting up higher and higher fences around ourselves to keep out everyone else. And that is making life worse for those people. And so we're more afraid of them and we make the fences higher and we reinforce them. Maybe we put guys with guns at the top of the fence and it just keeps getting worse. It's a vicious cycle. If we want to stop it, we need to start being good neighbors. We need to start sharing because we're not doing that. And it's a problem everywhere. It's not a city problem. It's not a rural problem. It's an everyone problem. And that is what I have to say when I am given the word street. Okay, we're going to wrap it up there. My ukulele's over there. I'm not going to do the goodbye song, but, well, yeah, I'm wrapping it up, so whatever. I can do a cut here. One last thing before I do the goodbye song, just a reminder to please hit the like and subscribe buttons, share this with your friends if you're enjoying it. Anything you can do to help this channel grow, I would really appreciate it. Also, let me know in the comments how you feel about this format. This is my first time trying it, so I'm like a little rusty on the improv side of things, but I feel like this is a thing that I could keep doing if people are interested in seeing it, and maybe I'll do that even if people aren't interested, but I would like your feedback. Okay, thank you so much. Here we go. Well, thank you, friend, for your visit today. Now it's time we both go on our way. The world will still be insane tomorrow, but don't let that fill your heart with sorrow. You can thrive in a desert, just ask a saguaro. Please give to my Patreon. Capitalism is fun. Let's build a world that is good. This is a show for adults. Bye, friends. Thank you so much.